disc jockey, drop the bass. Now the heads.
I don't think I'm getting out of this one without pissing a lot of people off. You know, let's start out the year on something nice and easy. So let's go after both simultaneously white supremacy and the very idea of cultural appropriation, because that's sure to win people over to my side. A lot of people seem het up over two things that really, really don't matter. On the one hand, you've got people that seem to think that if your skin isn't brown, for example, you can't wear your hair in certain ways. And on the other side, you've got people who think that because your skin is white, you're necessarily therefore superior somehow and are responsible for every amazing advance in human society throughout the millennia. Neither are true. Both are utterly stupid and both are utterly divisive. Think of it this way, right? Instagram runs the same whether your iPhone is rose gold or plain white. While you might get upset at your parents for getting you the wrong colour if you're a spoiled little millennial, it doesn't make any practical difference to how it runs, how good the pictures are, or anything else. The device is the device, only the outer shell is different. And this can be said more aptly perhaps for Android devices. You will find any number of phones with very similar hardware capabilities and so on. They're just different shapes, sizes, colours, that sort of thing, but pretty much by and large software will run entirely the same. And so it is with people. The differences between our races are incredibly minor and really only manifest at the cutting edge of medical technology. Slight tendencies for different medical conditions, slight changes in possibilities of different diseases like heart disease or types of cancer, that sort of thing. But as far as your brain is concerned, the differences are incredibly minor. We simply haven't had enough time to really diverge evolutionarily, and if you get into things like gene testing and so on, you'll discover that surprisingly high percentages of your genes come from other clades and racial groups. So this idea of the separation of the races is pretty damn artificial, and the one place where it genuinely matters, the brain, we're pretty much the same. Now, at this point, some race realist will usually try to bring up, but my IQ scores. IQ is an imperfect study, an imperfect way of measuring general intelligence, though it has improved. It used to be more culturally biased. They've tried to work away from that. But there are lots of other factors that can influence IQ. Things like poverty, diet, lack of education and so on. Things that foster and encourage general intelligence. And these things are often missing or compromised or less prevalent in places like immigrant communities and impoverished communities with overrepresentation of racial minorities. So that's going to skew your results. So you're going to have to take that into account, and you need to test like for like. And lo and behold, when we do, these supposed differences disappear within the margin of error, much like the wage gap, similar issues. So don't come at me with that, it's bullshit. So if we're going to talk about groups being better than one another, if we have to talk about that, then it's not the colour of your skin that's going to be making the difference. It's the memes, it's the culture, it's the paradigm in which we live and in which we've been brought up. It's the things we've learned. And I think there is a case to be made there that Western culture, whatever that means, is superior. It seems to have delivered more wealth, it seems to have delivered more freedom, it seems to have delivered more happiness and security. It's not to say it's not without problems. We're currently facing yet another battle with completely laissez-faire capitalism and crony capitalism and corruption. Democracy needs updating badly. We've got issues, but you look at it overall and we have the power, we have the technology, we have the wealth. Not all of that for good reasons, but I'm talking about superiority, not about ethical worth. Though even there, if you look at our cultures, within our cultures, we have equality on the basis of gender, race, whatever else. People nitpick about various bits, but you look at the rest of the world, look back to Western nations, and tell me we've got it bad. I don't think we do. This isn't to say that white people is superior, it's to say that Western culture certainly appears to be one of the better cultural solutions that we have found. That sounds bad, but consider this. I think Western culture is so much better, so superior, so much more effective because it's syncretic, because it is open, because it is multicultural, because it is willing to take on these other things. And I find that to be the ultimate irony. You find racists, though they fixate upon skin colour, saying, well, look at our culture, it's superior, it's better. And they have a point. But what makes it better is the fact that it is open, the fact that it is willing to take in people and examine other cultures and ideas and bring them in and stir them together and use what works and discard what doesn't. You know, our mathematics comes from the Arabs and the Indians. You know, we have Indian cuisine on the high street. Our fashions are constantly influenced by other places we've been. When we went out on empire, we did a lot of terrible things, but we also took Greek ideas of democracy, classical education, the idea of universal education, railways, the telegraph, parliamentary democracy. We took all that there and we came back with fashions and spices and cuisine and ideas and concepts and people. We brought people back, different perspectives, and many of those people enriched our societies and made them better because we were multicultural. You know, we mixed together European ideas. People have this idea of Western civilization as being this one homogenous blob, but Anglo culture and French culture and Italian culture and Spanish culture and Eastern European culture, these are all different. They all have different things. You know, and it's been our willingness to absorb and take on and examine and test and study and discard that has made us the superior culture, if you want. And there may be other solutions and better solutions. You know, we need to be willing to adapt and change. That's the measure of fitness in biology, and it's also a measure of fitness in memetics, in societies. You know, does this setup work? Will it continue to work? Situations change. Is it able to adapt and evolve and change to fit that new situation? And I think we are able to. Do you really think it makes a difference whether Western liberal secularism is running on a white brain or a brown brain? Do you really think radical Islamism is better when it runs on a white brain than a brown brain? What difference does it make? These are good memes and bad memes. So it's the culture that makes the difference, not this crude matter. So the far left and the far right both have it utterly wrong in this instance. And what both of them are doing weakens our societies as a whole. On the left, increasingly you see people wanting to segregate themselves, to separate themselves, to refuse to intermingle cultures, afraid of their culture being lost. That can't happen. You know, you can write shit down, you can record things, your culture can't be lost. And when we mingle cultures and when we take good ideas from each other, we all get stronger. I mean, the historical case in point of this is probably Japan. Japan abruptly, in the 19th century, decided, these Western powers are a bit strong, I think we should adopt a lot of their ideas. And they industrialized and they became a major power. And despite being a small set of islands, rather like Britain, you know, they became not a nice conquering power, but a conquering power nonetheless. They went from isolationist, relatively primitive, technology base and ideas to a fully modern state with surprising rapidity and a surprising lack of the upheavals that afflicted, say, Russia undergoing the same transformation. So on the far left you have these problems with this idea of cultural appropriation, that nobody should be allowed to use our culture and our culture should be held sacred somehow. And that stifles growth and prevents ideas being passed along, and it can even move people backwards. If you look at ideas such as decolonization, at the extreme ends of that, it's talking about rolling back, Western ideas of science. But science isn't a Western idea; it's what works. It works regardless of culture or religion or faith or philosophy. It just works. So to pretend that's cultural is going way too far. And on the far right, do I even need to say, we've got these people fixated on race and not wanting foreigners or anything to influence us, even though our culture genuinely has been enriched and strengthened by ideas down the millennia that we've taken on and incorporated and used. It makes no sense either side. Now lastly, this isn't to say that there aren't problems, and the right-wingers, for all I find them distasteful and so on, the trouble is that people on the left, people on the centre ground, have ceded the conversation about immigration and so on to the right. We daren't touch it. We daren't admit that there are problems with the approach, that Islamic terrorism is a real thing and a real problem and a significant problem. Things have changed from the way they used to be. I mean, you look back to earlier generations that settled in the UK, Indians, Pakistanis, and so on, settled, incorporated, became part of the culture, largely fine. This is going back to the 70s and 80s, or the Windrush earlier. But the more modern generations of immigrants coming in seem to be self-ghettoizing, not becoming syncretic with the overall culture. They're not exchanging with the wider culture isn't exchanging with them. Rather, they're staying in these bubbles and nobody is gaining in the same way that they used to. We look at things like the Brexit vote. I'm not whinging, I'm just saying we look at the example here. People expressing immigration and so on as a worry were largely people from areas where immigration wasn't happening. Whereas in the cities and places where people are living cheek by jowl and can't necessarily segregate so much, most especially London, where the culture is much more integrated and people actually talk and exchange with each other, there people weren't so against it. So the answer isn't this segregation. I mean, if people want to be accepted, they need to get out of their ghettos and they need to intermingle with the outer culture. And with Islamism, that's not happening. That's a problem, but that again is a cultural problem. It's a mimetic problem. It's not the color of their skin that's doing it. It's the values and ideas and concepts of that culture. Is there anything we can learn from them? I don't know. I certainly don't run into it online. I'm hopeful that there's something we can learn from these cultures, even if it's just the cuisine or style or something. The value of community, perhaps. Maybe there's something there. But it's hard to know if people don't intermix, don't adapt and acclimate, if there's no cultural exchange. And that, I think, is the problem. And you can also map that onto the increasing political divide in the US and the way in which people have retreated into their fake news bubbles and their echo chambers and so on. There you're seeing what used to be an overall culture tear itself apart into two separate kinds of culture, a more coastal European style approach to society and a more right-wing traditionalist isolationist view on society. And that's two cultures that used to be intermixing being torn apart, and not even by physical forces, just by their own volition. And how do you solve that one? That is a puzzler. Anyway, I've wonked on long enough. The underlying point, too long, didn't listen, is that what matters is ideas, is culture, is the software that you're running, not your appearance, your skin colour, whether your hair is curly or not. And that both the idea of cultural appropriation and the idea of cultural racial purity are both utter nonsense, historically and in every other way. Zang. M.